to seek to regain their independence from the colonial masters. There is a sense, therefore, in which these individuals started recognizing that having been enslaved, having been colonized, we now had to liberate ourselves. And the agitation started, and Kwame Nkrumah and his Ghana acquired independence in 1957. And I still can hear Kwame Nkrumah through the vicissitudes of time saying in Accra, Ghana, that Ghana is free and will never be colonized again. But the freedom of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. I can hear Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere saying that he is prepared to delay the independence of Tanganyika so that Tanganyika, Kenya, Uganda would become independent at one time. Mwalimu could see the future with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. Jomo Kenyatta and Obote could not. And therefore, we gained independence as separate states, and the story will be told shortly. So what do we see? The agitation, the demand by the people that we must be decolonized. And why is it that we were asking that we must be decolonized? Why is it that we were demanding that we must regain our independence? Because throughout the ages, it was always the divine plan that men must be masters of their destiny. And when we gained our independence, the leaders of the day were eloquent as they were clear that the reason why we were asking to be independent is because we wanted to take charge of our affairs. We wanted to be the governors. We wanted to have our young men and women acquire education. We wanted to control the production of our food through agriculture. We wanted to build our infrastructure. We wanted to improve the quality of the lives of our people by improving their health. We wanted to eliminate poverty. We were clear on what we wanted, and this message was as clear in West Africa as it was clear in East Africa, as it was clear in Central Africa, as it was clear in Northern Africa, so that if you listen to Kwame Nkrumah, it's as if you'd listen to Agostino Neto, and if you listen to Neto, it's as if you'd listen to Samora Moses Machel, and if you listen to Ahmed Ben Bella in the Maghreb, it's as if you'd listen to Patrice Emery Lumumba. There is a sense in which there was unanimity that this was the only way, and we attained independence. And I remember so very vividly, in 1957, in Casablanca, Morocco, was it in 1960, when the then 8 independent African countries met, on the Osagia for Kwame Nkrumah was clear that we must ensure that everybody else regains their independence, and that we must remember that the colonial master is not asleep, and that if we don't unite, he'll come under other guises through the neo-colonial project, but they listened to Kwame Nkrumah not. And even before they assembled in 1963, in the month of May in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, no sooner had countries started attaining independence than the neo-colonial project started taking root. And in 1960, the first coup d'etat and assassination took place in Togo when Sylvanus Olympio was eliminated. 1 year later, Patrice Emery Lumumba was eliminated. So that in 1963, in the month of May, when 32 heads of states and government assembled in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, there were several speeches, but 3 speeches stand out. Kwame Nkrumah's speech, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere's speech, and Emperor Haile Selassie's speech. Haile Selassie was the host, and his inimitable style, he reminded the congregation who are present in Africa Hall in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, that that was a momentous occasion, and that the long-term health of Africa not only required but demanded that Africa must pull in the same direction, Haile Selassie said. And Mwalimu took the baton from Haile Selassie and repeated the same words, celebrating the fact that we were independent and we had the opportunity of determining in our affairs. But the greatest of the speeches was that of the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah had a sense of urgency which everybody else did not have. He said, not in so many words, but in effect, that if we want to immunize ourselves from the diabolical machinations of the erstwhile colonial master, now turned neo-colonizer, we have to move here as one Africa, with the United States of Africa, with one army, with one currency, with one central bank, and with one nation. But they listened to him not. They had started getting used to the trappings of power. So what they came out with on that day in the month of May 1963 was a weak organization of African unity, the OAU, which many commentators were quick to describe in many ways and many times as the toothless bulldog. It was never a dog. It did not have teeth, but the effect of it is that it did not do very much. Some say it was a talking shop. Mzee Warioba, who was then active in political life and in other sectors, will attest to that. Yet later, we were to create another body, the African Union, and we'll have something to say about that. So we come out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in 1963, clear as to what we want to do. The African politician begins to emerge. We have them in different parts, but they begin to show characters that are totally inimical to our expectations. You of the Swahili say, maskini akipata matako huliambwata. Maskini walipata matako zililiambwata. They started getting used to the trappings of power. And we started having countries which we thought would liberate us. And I'm talking about the hygiene of the politics. It started disappearing. Many of these individuals now thought that they were demigods, suffering from what I call the Messiah complex, thinking that they had been brought to Africa to liberate her, and that they suffered from two major diseases. One of them is the martyr syndrome, and the other one is the Messiah complex. They think that their countries owed them. Africa started producing leaders that one cannot recognize. How many of you will forget Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic, that man who murdered little children in the streets because they did not buy a uniform from his wife? That's Jean Bedel Bokassa. How many of you will forget Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendu wa Nzambanga, who changed his country's name and presided over a kleptocratic regime? The Democratic Republic of Congo is the richest resource country on earth. Conservatively, it is said that under her belly, she has minerals which is equivalent to 34.1 trillion United States dollars. And yet today, it is one of the poorest nations on earth. It is the only nation on earth which on the day of the election has its president saying, we know we ought to have elections, but we have no money to hold elections. When you see a country which has as its official name the Democratic Republic of Congo, know that there is no democracy. In fact, I dare say that any country, 2 countries that I know insisting on having as a part of their official name the Democratic Republic of something are never democratic. The other one is Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. It's as if when you can't graduate to be a doctor, you go to the church and you ask to be baptized as Dr. Mwadime. But that is not the point. The point is that who can forget Mobutu Sese Seko? Who can forget Idi Amin of Uganda? Who can forget Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia? And one can go on and on, because hygiene had started disappearing from African politics. Our agriculture was beginning to suffer. European musicians who had a little sense of guilt came to perform in Africa, Bob Geldof, to free the Ethiopians out of hunger. There was no hygiene in our politics. We could not run our education systems. Our young men and women were going to India because the budgets meant for education were consumed by individuals whom we had entrusted with the task of presiding over it. Our health sectors were beginning to collapse. And as I've said before, the political leadership did not have any faith in those institutions. Typically, the typical African politician, perhaps not in Tanzania today, if they were sick, they had a cold, they would not go to Muhimbili, they would go to London. If they were Kenyan, they would not go to Kenyatta Hospital, they would run to the United Kingdom. Tragedy, no hygiene in our politics, because Africans had started engaging in theft. In fact, I used to say that African politicians were thieves. Then I went to Uganda and I was told that they are not thieves, they are looters. And when I went to Liberia last week, I was told they are not looters. I was told they are looters on an industrial scale. That is the logical metamorphosis of the African politician, whose appetite for public wealth is completely insatiable. Hygiene was disappearing from African politics, and we could see the effect of the disappearance of hygiene in African politics. But there was always the erstwhile colonial master to assist. Coup d'etats started visiting Africa. Modibo Keita in Mali was consumed. Nnamdi Azikiwe in Nigeria was consumed. Diosagie for Kwame Nkrumah was consumed. Apollo Milton Obote was consumed. Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau was consumed. Patrice Emery Lumumba was consumed. Coups were so frequent in Africa that Afro-pessimists were now hard to say that coups were as frequent as breakfast. But even breakfast was not frequent on African tables. We could not feed ourselves because there was no hygiene in African politics. Your typical African politicians took the view that they had a divine mission to preside over their countries. They arrogated to themselves the monopoly of wisdom. If you listen to some of them, and I listen to the radio announcements announcing the activities of one leader of an African country, Habyarimana Juvenal, it would take 3 minutes to say the things that he had done. He was the leading farmer. He was the leading singer. He was the leading intellectual. He was the leading husband. And he was the leading everything. We had monsterized our leaders, and they became immune from any kind of advice. Meanwhile, the African was suffering. The African woman who thought that upon attainment of political independence, she would now deliver in a decent hospital was still the victim of a village midwife. The African woman was suffering. The African woman who thought that they would now get water in a tap in their homes was still running 5 kilometers away to get water. Meanwhile, our monster leaders were laundering their clothes in France and in Paris. The African woman who thought that they would go to Kariakoo market here in Dar es Salaam or Owino market in Kampala, Uganda, and get all the goodies could not get them because meanwhile, the Minister for Agriculture had agreed that bad seed be supplied, and meanwhile, we were getting mangoes from Europe. The African woman who thought that they could have food on the table could not have food on the table. We had killed all our sugar industries that we may have sugar from Brazil and Mexico. And the African youth was no different. The African youth who thought that upon realization of independence, there would be occasion for them to get employment was now being humiliated at the embassies of the United States of America as he struggled to get the almighty green card. The young African who thought that liberation would bring something new was now struggling at the United Kingdom embassy, filling a document that is 50 pages long, being asked who their great-great-grandfathers were and what enterprise they were engaged in. And they could not stop there. They went to the Australian embassy and to the French embassy, and the treatment was the same. The African youth was being treated like a leper, like a pariah, like a subhuman being. And they were asking, for what purpose did we gain this thing called independence? And those who are not humiliated in Gambia, in Nigeria, in Niger, were crossing the Red Sea, swimming across the Mediterranean to go to Italy so that they may be enslaved anew. Meanwhile, the African leader was busy looting from their countries and buying mansions in Paris and in London and in Florida, and driving private jets and helicopters and being addressed as their excellencies and honorables instead of being addressed properly as horribles.